Between Silverstone and Spa, Lewis Hamilton walked through the doors of Ferrari's Maranello headquarters, carrying nothing more than a slim black folder. It looked unremarkable to the untrained eye, not the kind of thing that would send ripples through the paddock. But to those inside Ferrari's inner circle, it was something closer to a declaration of war. The cameras never saw it, but multiple sources confirmed that this was not a set of race notes or casual setup tweaks. Inside that folder was what some are now calling a power map, a comprehensive, driver-led blueprint for Ferrari's 2026 Formula One Challenger. This wasn't about shaving a tenth off the SF25's lap time next weekend. It was about embedding Hamilton's DNA into the car that will define the next regulation era. Active aero deployment strategies, hybrid power distribution patterns, revised suspension geometry, altered pedal box positioning, and steering feedback curves tuned to his exact driving instincts. The dossier was meticulous. According to insiders, Charles Leclerc never even saw it. While the headlines in Hungary fixated on Hamilton's Q2 exit and Leclerc's pole position, the real shift in Ferrari's balance of power was happening far from the track. Former F1 driver Juan Pablo Montoya, speaking cryptically to Colombian media, warned that Leclerc's life will get harder. At the time, it sounded like speculation. Now, in light of Hamilton's closed-door meeting, it reads more like a coded prediction. Because in Formula One, influence inside the factory often matters more than anything the world sees on Sunday afternoon, and Hamilton has just made his biggest move yet. To understand why this single folder matters, you have to step back and look at the internal hierarchy at Ferrari over the past 5 years. Charles Leclerc has been their golden project, the Monegasque prodigy who carried the Scuderia's hopes through turbulent seasons. He's been the de facto voice in the simulator, the default reference for car balance feedback, the emotional centerpiece of the team's marketing. But Formula One has a long history of power tilting toward the driver who can translate influence into engineering control. Michael Schumacher didn't just win at Ferrari. He shaped its technical philosophy down to the positioning of the brake bias adjuster on the steering wheel. Fernando Alonso's years at Renault were defined by a chassis molded to his corner entry aggression. In both cases, the number one wasn't always decided by lap time alone, but by who dictated the DNA of the car before it was even born. Now in 2025, Ferrari is staring down a complete reset for 2026. Smaller, lighter cars, narrower tyres, active aero replacing DRS, and a new 50-50 hybrid power split. That's a once-in-a-decade opportunity for a driver to lock in their style as the template for the next era. Leclerc's advantage is history and loyalty. Hamilton's advantage is that he's been here before. He understands the politics of a regulation change better than almost anyone still on the grid. And by walking into Maranello with a pre-engineered blueprint, he's skipped months of back-and-forth debate and dropped a fully formed vision directly into the laps of Ferrari's decision-makers. The dossier itself reads like something a technical director would submit to the FIA, not the handiwork of a driver between races. According to multiple engineers who've seen it, the opening pages set the tone. A revised weight distribution target specifically designed for the reduced wheelbase of the 2026 cars, optimizing rotation in slow-speed corners while maintaining stability under high-speed aero load. The active aero section was even more revealing. Instead of treating the movable elements as simple drag reduction tools, Hamilton's plan maps their deployment to mimic the effect of high rake philosophy under braking, creating extra rotation into medium-speed corners without sacrificing straight-line efficiency. The hybrid strategy pages outlined a power deployment curve that holds back 15% more electrical energy in the first sector to unleash through the exit of the longest straight, a tactic aimed at maximizing overtaking windows without compromising tyre life. Suspension geometry drawings were paired with pedal box repositioning to subtly change Hamilton's brake and throttle cadence, while steering column specifications demanded an adjustable feedback profile that can be tuned per circuit. Even the brake migration maps were tuned to favour aggressive front axle loading, perfect for Hamilton's late braking style. These aren't throwaway ideas from a post-session chat. They're KD-level schematics, cross-referenced with simulator data, wind tunnel results, and computational fluid dynamics plots. One engineer described Hamilton's technical fluency as unusual for a driver, noting that he referenced airflow separation points and cooling efficiency margins with the precision of someone who'd been studying the design in private for months. The message was clear. This wasn't a suggestion box. This was a manifesto. In Formula One, verbal feedback is disposable. It disappears the moment the next race weekend starts. But a printed, signed, and archived technical document lives forever. It can be cited in disputes, referenced during design reviews, and passed between departments without the driver ever being in the room. That permanence is where the real power lies. Hamilton's decision to put his 2026 vision on paper was a calculated move to elevate his influence above the noise of weekend debriefs. Leclerc, by his own admission, relies on verbal feedback during visits to the factory. That's the traditional model, reactive, based on adapting to what the engineers give you. But in the politics of a regulation reset, reactive loses to preemptive every time. With Hamilton's dossier now circulating behind closed doors, the centre of gravity inside Ferrari's technical department shifts ever so slightly toward his vision. It's a slow process. Influence rarely changes overnight. But every time a designer references his document, every time an engineer integrates one of his specifications into a CFD run, that shift grows stronger. And by the time the first 2026 chassis mock-up is bolted together, it may already be too late to unpick his fingerprints from the design. Inside Ferrari's simulator suites, the contrast between Hamilton and Leclerc's working styles is already stark. Engineers describe Hamilton's sessions as exhaustive, hours spent cycling through ride height tolerances by millimetre increments, experimenting with active aero profiles in transitional phases, and fine-tuning steering feedback maps until they match his exact corner entry feel. He will request multiple tyre degradation simulations, sometimes asking for worst-case scenarios that push the car into thermal runaway just to understand the failure point. He'll compare CFD flow visualizations against live telemetry to validate his instincts, effectively running his own internal R&D loop in parallel to the design team. Leclerc, by contrast, prefers a more fluid reactive approach. He adapts to the car's balance rather than micromanaging every parameter, relying on natural car control to find performance. Under stable regulations, these philosophies can coexist. One driver's proactive engineering immersion, the other's instinctive adaptability. But 2026 is not a normal reset. The smaller chassis, narrower tyres, active aero, and new hybrid split mean the setup DNA will be baked in from day one. If that DNA is tuned to Hamilton's specifications, Leclerc could face a machine that resists his rhythm. And in Formula One, the driver most at one with the car becomes the de facto development leader. That's not just a question of lap time, it's optics. Engineers gravitate toward the driver, whose feedback aligns with the stopwatch, and management tends to reward the voice-producing solutions, not questions. The danger for Leclerc is subtle. The shift happens gradually, almost invisibly, until suddenly the entire program is orbiting Hamilton's driving philosophy. By then, adapting becomes an uphill battle against a car's very nature. Right now, Leclerc holds the points advantage in the standings, but inside Maranello's glass-walled offices, that metric carries less weight than it seems. When a regulation change looms, the calculus changes from who's ahead today to whose vision will shape tomorrow's car. Influence in this phase works like compound interest. Each development cycle aligned to Hamilton's dossier reinforces his authority. Every successful correlation between his simulator targets and real-world performance adds another layer of trust. Over time, those small victories in the design room can outweigh a season's worth of points on the track. We've seen this pattern before. Schumacher's dominance at Ferrari was built not just on wins, but on years of cars evolving toward his feedback. The same with Vettel at Red Bull, Senna at McLaren. Once the car bends toward one driver's style, the development trajectory becomes self-sustaining. The risk for Leclerc is that by the time the first 2026 car rolls out, the only meaningful question won't be who's faster, but who is the car faster for. And in that equation, points scored in 2025 are a fading currency. The rest of the paddock isn't blind to this shift. Rival teams will be watching Ferrari's internal dynamic closely, looking for signs of a development bias that could be exploited. Red Bull, with Adrian Newey's instinct for capitalising on regulation resets, may already be modelling scenarios where a Hamilton-shaped Ferrari forces Leclerc into adaptation mode. McLaren, riding the momentum of Lando Norris's rise, will quietly analyse whether Ferrari's 2026 concept could leave strategic gaps to exploit in early races. Even within Ferrari, Leclerc's camp will be considering ways to reassert his influence, whether by pushing for dedicated simulator time, lobbying for specific design features, or simply beating Hamilton on track often enough to keep the debate alive. But Hamilton has another advantage: political insulation. By arriving with a complete, technically credible dossier, he's positioned himself not just as a driver with opinions, but as an active problem solver for Ferrari's engineering department. In F1 politics, that makes him harder to challenge without appearing to obstruct progress. And once the engineering team believes the new car's performance potential hinges on Hamilton's input, the cost of sidelining him becomes too high. Project forward to the first test of 2026, and the picture becomes clearer. If Ferrari's new car rolls out and feels like an extension of Hamilton's hands, the intra-team hierarchy will shift instantly. Not by decree, but by necessity. Leclerc would be fighting to adapt to a car that speaks a different mechanical language, while Hamilton would be operating in a machine built to amplify his strengths. That scenario has ripple effects. Strategists might lean toward Hamilton in split decision moments. Upgrade paths might prioritize his feedback. Even sponsorship narratives could tilt in his favour if he's seen as the architect of Ferrari's return to form. And once that perception sets in, it can persist for years. Conversely, if Leclerc manages to adapt quickly and beat Hamilton in a car tuned to the Britain's style, it could elevate his standing beyond anything a standard points lead could achieve. Either way, the first half of 2026 will likely decide not just the championship fight, but the long-term leadership inside Ferrari. In the end, this isn't just a story about a folder carried into a closed-door meeting. It's about a driver using the politics of engineering to write himself into a team's future before the car even exists. Hamilton's 2026 dossier is more than technical diagrams. It's a stake in the ground, a claim on the DNA of Ferrari's next era. By putting his vision in writing, he's created a permanent reference point that engineers, strategists and management can rally around. Leclerc still has the speed, still has the victories, but in the long game of influence, the stopwatch is only part of the battle. In Formula One, the true contest often happens months before the first lap is turned, in design reviews, simulator runs and whispered conversations in factory corridors. Montoya's warning hangs in the air. The toughest laps for Leclerc may not be in qualifying or the race, but in the meeting rooms where the future is decided. And when that first active aero flap moves in 2026, it won't just be channeling downforce, it will be carrying the imprint of the driver who piece by piece engineered the battle to win from the inside out. The 2025 season will end long before the real fight is settled. The question is whether Ferrari will enter the next era as a team built for two champions or one.